Zeldin's climate change power grab, destroying Obama's legacy. In a bold move that has sparked heated debate, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin staunchly defended his controversial decision to revoke an Obama-era regulation aimed at curbing climate change. This pivotal rule, known as the Endangerment Finding, had granted the EPA authority to oversee and regulate emissions from vehicles, airplanes, and coal plants, all in an effort to combat the escalating threat of climate change. But here's where it gets controversial. Zeldin pledged that he would not allow the regulation to entirely wipe out sectors of the economy, a stance that has ignited a firestorm of reactions from both supporters and critics alike. The Endangerment Finding, published under former President Obama's administration, had concluded that greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide and methane, posed a grave threat to human life by accelerating climate change. This finding served as the cornerstone for the EPA to impose stringent regulations on various industries, including automotive, aviation, and energy sectors. Business leaders had voiced concerns that these regulations jeopardized the survival of their companies, and this is the part most people miss. Notably, the endangerment finding was a key component in the Biden administration's electric vehicle mandate, which would have required over half of all cars sold to be electric by 2032. In a significant announcement at an Indianapolis auto dealership in July, Zeldin declared that he was dismantling what he termed the holy grail of the climate change religion. He hailed this move as the largest deregulatory announcement in U.S. history, asserting that it would end over a decade of uncertainty for American automakers and consumers. In a recent interview with CNN, Zeldin elaborated on his rationale, stating that when the rule was enacted, the EPA administrators had relied on both optimistic and pessimistic forecasts regarding the future impacts of climate change. He argued that the pessimistic predictions had not materialized, and his decision was based on 2025 facts, rather than 2009 bad assumptions. Zeldin contended that the endangerment finding overstepped the EPA's legal boundaries by filling in gaps in the law, essentially legislating itself. He emphasized that the agency could not manipulate the law to suit its objectives, and that issues related to regulating mobile sources of pollution, such as cars, should be addressed by Congress. He accused the Obama-era bureaucrats of making mental leaps to justify the endangerment finding. When asked by CNN host Cassie Hunt why he didn't simply leave the finding in place, Zeldin firmly stated that he does not have the authority to make up the law. Power comes from the law. I don't just get to make up the law. In order to make America the AI capital of the world, in order to unleash energy dominance, to protect jobs, to bring down energy costs, we are not going to regulate out of existence entire sectors of our economy, Zeldin declared. This decision has not only stirred controversy, but also opened up a broader conversation about the role of government in regulating industries, and the potential consequences of such regulations on the economy and the environment. What are your thoughts on this? Do you agree with Zeldin's decision? Or do you believe that stricter regulations are necessary to combat climate change? Share your views in the comments below. Trump's climate rollback. Impact on industry and environment. Imagine a world where the fight against climate change is not only hindered, but also deliberately dismantled. This is the reality we're facing today, as the Trump administration takes a sledgehammer to one of the most crucial Obama-era legacies in the battle against global warming. The Environmental Protection Agency's EPA recent announcement to revoke its endangerment finding is a devastating blow to the efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to cleaner energy sources. The endangerment finding, issued in 2009, was a landmark moment in the fight against climate change. It formally recognized global warming as a threat to public health and gave the EPA the authority to regulate emissions from cars, power plants, factories, and other sources of pollution. Withdrawing this finding would essentially give the Trump administration a free pass to eliminate these regulations, paving the way for increased pollution and environmental degradation. But here's where it gets interesting. You would expect the industries that have been lobbying against these regulations to be over the moon with excitement. However, Their response has been surprisingly muted. The Edison Electric Institute, the National Association of Manufacturers, and other trade organizations have been eerily silent, with only a few tepid statements of support. So, what's behind this lack of enthusiasm? The answer lies in the fact that the world has changed dramatically since 2009. The cost of renewable energy has plummeted, making it more competitive with fossil fuels. The development of cleaner energy technologies has accelerated, and the market has begun to shift towards more sustainable options. In short, the industries that once saw these regulations as a threat now recognize that they are essential for their own survival and growth. The Biden administration's efforts to invest in cleaner energy and reduce greenhouse gas emissions have been a game changer. The Inflation Reduction Act, signed into law in 2022, has provided billions of dollars in subsidies for the development of solar and wind energy, electric vehicles, and other clean energy technologies. This has created a surge in investment and job creation in the clean energy sector, with many Republican-leaning states benefiting disproportionately from these investments. However, the Trump administration's rollback of these policies is a major setback. The proposed rescinding of the endangerment finding, combined with the elimination of tax credits for wind and solar energy, and the cancellation of funding for clean energy research, will have far-reaching consequences. It will not only harm the environment, but also cede America's leadership in the clean energy sector to other countries, particularly China. The auto industry, for example, is already committed to electrification, with many manufacturers investing heavily in electric vehicle technology. However, the Trump administration's policies will only serve to delay and disrupt this transition, putting American companies at a competitive disadvantage. The consequences of these policies will be felt far beyond the energy sector. They will have significant implications for national security, as the U.S. becomes increasingly dependent on foreign oil and vulnerable to price shocks. They will also have devastating impacts on public health. As air and water pollution increase and extreme weather events become more frequent and intense. So what can be done to stop this rollback? The answer lies in political pressure. Industry groups, which have been silent until now, must speak out forcefully against these policies. They must recognize that their own interests are at stake and that the transition to cleaner energy is essential for their survival and growth. The rest of us must also make our voices heard. We must demand that our elected representatives take action to protect the environment and promote clean energy. We must hold them accountable for their actions and ensure that they prioritize the health and well-being of their constituents over the interests of polluters and special interests. The fight against climate change is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. We must recognize the urgency of this crisis and take immediate action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and transition to cleaner energy sources. The future of our planet depends on it. EPA Administrator defends repeal of climate policy. What's next? In a striking move that has raised eyebrows across the environmental community, EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin recently stood up for the Trump administration's decision to overturn the significant 2009 endangerment finding. This controversial finding established that emissions from fossil fuels pose a threat to human health and safety. During his appearance on CNN's State of the Union, Zeldin asserted that previous conclusions about climate science were overly pessimistic and that more accurate data from 2025 should replace outdated assumptions from 2009. He enthusiastically declared, "The great news is that a lot of the pessimistic views of the science in 2009 that was being assumed ended up not panning out." This original endangerment finding has been a foundational element for the EPA's substantial regulations aimed at curbing climate pollution and protecting the environment. The potential repeal of this finding is alarming for many, as it could dismantle a federal government's strongest tool for regulating greenhouse gas emissions and addressing climate change effectively. The administration's proposal suggests that, although greenhouse gas emissions have increased globally, they attribute this surge to emissions from outside the United States. It claims that these increases have not led to the severe health impacts the EPA anticipated back in 2009. Interestingly, this contention raises the question, Just how seriously can we evaluate the effects of foreign emissions versus domestic policies? The U.S. stands as the second largest greenhouse gas emitter globally and has historically contributed more climate-changing pollution than any other nation. Numerous recent scientific studies have underscored the reality that climate-related pollution is not merely a health risk, but a direct threat to lives. As noted by the World Health Organization, climate change is linked with a range of serious health consequences, highlighting an urgent need for decisive action rather than falling back on outdated claims. Climate scientist Zeke Hausfather pointed out a startling fact. Since the public first became aware of the endangerment finding in 2009, global temperatures have risen by about 0.45 degrees Celsius, or 0.81 degrees Fahrenheit. He stated emphatically, both the scientific certainty around climate change and evidence of the dangers it is causing have grown stronger since 2009. There is no evidence that has emerged that would in any way challenge the scientific basis of the 2009 endangerment finding. This begs a crucial question of reliability. Why are we potentially disregarding empirical evidence that has only strengthened over time? When Zeldin was questioned about his perceived skepticism regarding the scientific consensus on greenhouse gases being primary contributors to man-made climate change, he deflected, saying, "That might be your way to try to twist my words." Currently, the EPA is undergoing a public comment review for their proposal to withdraw all regulations concerning greenhouse gas emissions for vehicles, regulations that relied heavily on the 2009 finding. Acknowledging the importance of public input in this decision, Zeldin conveyed a sense of responsibility. "We're going through a public comment period. We want to make the right decision afterwards." However, he stressed that the intentions behind the 2009 finding were often misunderstood, suggesting that emissions of carbon dioxide were not directly studied as an endangerment to human health. When asked if the EPA should play a role in combating climate change, Zeldin cited the Supreme Court, stating, "I have to follow the law." He further clarified that the interpretation of law should not be subjective or left to personal judgment, but should be specifically outlined by Congress. This raises an important discussion point. If the responsibility lies solely with Congress, can we actually expect timely and effective action against climate change? As we contemplate these developments, it's essential to consider where we stand on the ongoing debates about the endangerment finding and the proposed repeal. Are we prioritizing the latest scientific insights, or are we revisiting outdated narratives? Let's hear your thoughts. Do you believe the EPA should maintain the 2009 endangerment finding? Or is it time for a reevaluation based on new data? Share your opinions in the comments below.